Welcome to the Hermetic Astrology Podcast. I'm Gary Caton in Waynesville, North Carolina. You can find me on the web at dreamastrologer.com. And today is February 24th. It's a Wednesday, so it's Mercury's Day. So happy Hermes Day, everybody. It's good to be back. I've been meaning to get back, and I threatened to chop open some heads, and and then it turns out that it was mine that sort of got actually it needs chopping open. There's all of this stuff coming through that I'm struggling to make sense of, but that's a good thing because that means I'm in touch with the powers that be and that there's good stuff on the way. But I do want to talk about I want to revisit the great conjunction in Aquarius of Jupiter and Saturn. There's still a lot of people talking about the Aquarian age and all that stuff, and I'm not really going to get into that. I don't think that the Aquarian age is very well understood at all, and it would take probably like several podcasts to get that sussed out. I think it's the Aquarian age if you want it to be, and but not necessarily the way you want it to be. Aquarius is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn is a planet of discipline and hard work and structure and deep esoteric secrets. So anything that's fluffy and short term is by definition the opposite, the very opposite of what Saturn is about. So I don't want to be a wet blanket necessarily on that party. I love Aquarius. I think Aquarius is great. But I think that there's a sort of outsider quality to it that unless you've been there, like I was homeless at one point in my life, and I will never forget that experience because, for instance, it's illegal to sleep when you're homeless. You can't even just lay down. You're not bothering anyone. You're just minding your own business, trying to get some rest in a quiet little place away from everything. And they come along and, hey, get the heck out of here. You can't sleep here. You know what I'm saying? So that experience of being outside of the system and getting locked up for not having any money in my pocket. Yeah. Some places they still have laws on the books where if you're without funds, you're considered a vagrant, and they can lock you up for vagrancy. Just learning all those lessons about what it really meant to be outside of the system. I guess it gives me a different perspective on the whole thing. And yes, I'm taking a while to get to the point here, and that's also a Saturn thing. I find it really humorous, these people that leave comments and reviews of, hey, he took 10 minutes to get to the point. It's like, 10 minutes? You haven't got 10 minutes to invest in order to receive, 28 years of experience that I have in this field. Listen to yourself. I mean, then okay, bye. You don't deserve what I'm about to lay down in that 15-minute mark. You know what I'm saying? So I think this whole Aquarian thing is going to take a long time to figure out. I'm not sure we'll figure it out in the 20 years we have under the dominion of this cycle. I think maybe perhaps it'll only be when we get further along into the cycle of the great conjunctions in air that we'll really look back and understand, whoa, that's what was going on. But I think that we can nevertheless take the time to step back and say, hey, what just happened? look more deeply at some of the hidden things that were going on. Last time we talked about the asteroids that were present, and what a wonderful alchemical story that unfolded. And this time we're going to talk about Pallas Athena being present in that conjunction horoscope as well. And this is really appropriate to revisit the Jupiter Saturn conjunction right now, because Mercury has just stationed direct. Didn't quite make it all the way back to Saturn, but is in the middle between Jupiter and Saturn in the sky. And I'm going to show you a little bit about that here. So let's see, how far am I into this thing? If I made it 10 minutes without getting to the point, I don't know, but in any case, here we go. So this is really another thing that I think is very, very poorly understood by the astrology community at large, not by every individual, but by most. And that is that as artists, we have a responsibility to choose the correct lens for the picture that we're trying to portray. Yeah. And unfortunately, most astrologers go around with only one lens. They've got the tropical zodiac, and they don't even understand that they're looking at the heavens from a top-down point of view, from point of view of the ecliptic North Pole, looking down. And so because of that viewpoint, because of the choice of that viewpoint, which wasn't really a choice at all for many of them, but nevertheless, you know, the Rush lyrics of that, even if you choose not to decide, you still made a choice, right? So this view doesn't give any depth. You can't see the vertical dimension of the ecliptic when you're looking at it from way up high, from its North Pole. So if we take the time to say, hey, let's take that lens off our camera for a second and let's flip it to the side, and that's what this is. This is a picture of the heavens from the side view of the ecliptic. The ecliptic is a band. It has depth, right? And it's particularly important to look at it in times like these, where Mercury is doing this looping motion. That is the most appropriate expression of what a retrograde is. It's a loop. That's not a simple back and forth. And furthermore, you can see from this loop that Mercury comes along, it's below the ecliptic plane, and then it crosses the ecliptic plane going up, and it crossed right at the point between the tail star of Capricorn, also known as Deneb Algeti, and there's another star north of that in Aquarius, in the water bearer, that's called Sad al Sud, the luckiest of the lucky. So there was this moment that we call a guzahar, which is derived from the Arabic Jau Zahir, which means becoming manifest, right? It's crossing the plane, it's crossing the main plane of existence, the orbit of the Earth around the sun. That's what the ecliptic is. It's intersecting, it's injecting its energy into the Earth plane, yeah? So this happened at the same time Mercury was making its maximum elongation in the sky. And then Mercury kind of goes around like this roller coaster ride where it goes up. And then now what's happening? Phew, it's coming down fast back towards the ecliptic. So even though Mercury's stationed direct, and this has nothing to do with any kind of made up shadow, by the way, absolutely nothing at all. And yet we can see that even though Mercury is stationed direct, there is still a rapid amount of change in the actual visible, measurable motion of Mercury. We don't need a shadow to explain that after the retrograde, things can still feel a little weird, you see? So Mercury is heading towards this conjunction with Jupiter, and it's going to happen right as Mercury is crossing the ecliptic plane in a downward fashion. And so let's think about that for a second. We're coming from up on high. Maybe we've had some beautiful dreams about the possibilities of what an Aquarian age could be. That's wonderful. But now it's time to get back down to reality and to figure out, hey, um, you know, this is Mercury's father, right? Jupiter. Hey, pops, what what can we actually do um, to begin to make this thing a reality? You know, I saw these wonderful dreams of an Aquarian age. Like, what can we do? Like, what? Send me on a mission. Give me a message. Give me. You know, I mean, that's pretty much always the relationship between Mercury and Jupiter. Yeah. Um, and so that becomes very interesting in and of itself, because I wrote an article for the Mountain Astrologer some time back about Pallas Athena, and what I said in there was that rather than thinking of these uh, asteroid goddesses as mediators between a personal planet and an outer planet, right? In other words, which is a wonderful idea. I mean, Demetra George came up with that, you know, in her book, in her seminal book, Asteroid Goddesses, that because astronomically, Mercury is close to Earth, Jupiter's farther away, the asteroids are literally in between. Like maybe they can mediate between well, the modern astrology notion would be that Uranus, right, that Pallas Athena would mediate between Mercury and Uranus. Well, what about Jupiter? Isn't Jupiter similar in nature? They're all airy, right? So you have Mercury, Jupiter, Pallas Athena, and Uranus. They form what I would call a mythical complex. That is, they all have similar myths. They all have similar energies. They're all airy, like the air element. And so when you see interactions between any of this group, that that the same kind of mythical and archetypal interpretations would be in order. See? Now, there's another thing going on here, which is that from the original, and I call traditional point of view, that is from the point of view of an astronomer, of an early observational astrologer who goes out and looks at the sky daily, right, from a Mesopotamian era point of view, before the Hellenistic times, right, where the horizon was the main plane, and there was actually 3 paths through the sky that were based on declination. The ecliptic plane wasn't the main plane that they focused on. From this, if we change our lens again, right, we go out and then we go outside in the morning and we're looking to see these bright beings. We'll look to the east just before sunrise, and in the northern hemisphere this time of year, the ecliptic forms a pretty flat angle to the horizon. And what this means is that with a steep angle, notice how, watch this point on my arm. And for those of you who are merely listening in, I mean, who are only listening in, you can get the visuals on YouTube, by the way. But watch this point where on my sleeve where the blue meets my skin, yeah? Watch how, as I tilt it further, making a shallower angle, that point becomes closer to this horizontal line, you see? Whereas if it's vertical, this point is, now imagine that this point is the sun. When it's a shallow line, the same time, we say 30 minutes before sunrise, the same time the sun will be further below the horizon when it's vertical and much closer to the horizon when it's more shallow. you see. So what happens is when the ecliptic is at a shallow angle to the horizon, the sun's beams shine further into the sky. It's harder for planets to escape the beams of the sun and be visible, to actually be seen. So even though by simple longitudinal reckoning, which is approximately 15 degrees, when a planet crosses that threshold, it becomes in what was known as in phasis, Phasis. Robert Schmidt went on about this to great length and suggested that when a planet is in phasis, when it's making an appearance, that it's sort of like this is my interpretation, but he said that you would put an exclamation by that planet, and that it saturates the entire chart with its significations. Well, that's a rather dramatic statement. Well, it's a rather dramatic thing for a planet to become visible after it wasn't, yeah? This is, in fact, the event that the earliest records that we have, for instance, the Venus tablet of Amisaduqua, that's all Venus entered the sky here, she left the sky here, entered here, left here. After entered here, left here, after so many days, re-entered. That's all they're paying attention to. It's these entrances and exits, yeah? So this is a very primal, and now you have my buddy Gemini Brett posted a picture the other day. He's already laid eyes on Mercury and Saturn. Jupiter's still, two things. Jupiter is a little bit south in latitude because it's past its south node in Capricorn. So that makes it harder to be seen. And Jupiter is also further along in the closer to the sun, into the sun's beams. So Jupiter hasn't quite been visible yet. But these three planets are in the process of making this appearance, making this phasis. And this is something that should show up in our awareness, in our lives, and in the world. There should be an announcement of some kind, yeah? It's kind of like in the movies where a new character enters the drama, right? Or if you're watching a play, enter stage right, exit stage left. These are important transitions in the story arc of what's going on, yeah? So it's really good to pay attention, and if possible, you can get out in the sky and lay eyes on these three planets. Another name for this, excuse me, that came later, they would call these planets, excuse me, Dorifori, spear bearers of the sun. So it's as if they are guards guarding the king, and they're in military terms, this would be your advance guard. You have a rear guard watching your rear, making sure nobody's sneaking up on you, and then you have your scouts, you have your advance guard that you send out to find out what's going on up here, yeah? And so at this point in time, the solar king or queen has three advanced guards out here to see, hey, what's going on, right? So there's this quality of looking at the future of, and hey, what is now, whether we want to call it an age of Aquarius, we can call it a double decade of Aquarius anyhow. At the very least, we have this 2-decade period that is presided over by a great conjunction in Aquarius. What does that look like? What is out there on the horizon for us to, what does it look like when I venture out of the comfort of the city and the comfort of being nestled within the system and being a part of the system, and I go renegade and I sleep on the ground and risk getting rousted by the cops? What does that look like? What's out there on the frontiers? Yeah, these are all questions that could be answered if we are willing to open our minds and to consider them at the moment. All right, so now that we're anchored in the moment, because this is the third pass of Mercury through this, well, really like this, right? It doesn't look like this, it looks like this if you look at it from the other view. But at any rate, this is the third pass of Mercury through this part of the sky. Let's go back and review this idea of Pallas Athena being born from the head of Zeus, and what can we actually do with that, right? So one interesting thing that I did is I went back and I looked at like what is the dogma surrounding the Jupiter Saturn cycle, and most of that originates in the Persian era of astrology, right? Astrology went from the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians and entered Greece, and there was this fusion of the three cultures that became Western tropical astrology as we know it. And then, of course, Western Europe entered what's known as the Dark Ages, and a lot of that knowledge resurfaced in Persia. And they literally translated these texts into Arabic and furthered the knowledge in ways that weren't thought about before. Solar returns come from this era, and the theory of this cycle of the great conjunctions comes from this era. And Abu Masar said that, hey, basically, it goes through the four elements. You've got 12 conjunctions in each element. They're 20 years apart. 12 times 20 is 240 years, and times 4 would be 960. That's a fair approximation of the cycle, but because of they were just coming up with algebra at this time, right? So because of the challenges with calculations, it's not really accurate. And but this is exactly what was passed along by Bonatti and even Ramsey, who's a contemporary of Lilly, as recently as a few hundred years ago. This was to be, this is what it is. Well, that's not what it is. Like I said last time, sorry, Bonatti, not sorry. That ain't the truth. It's a fair approximation, but we can do better as modern people. And so when you break it down, and I went back like 7,000, let's see, I went back about 7,000 years and I went forward a couple thousand years. All right. And I really broke this down and looked at it. And what you have is you can have anywhere between 11 and 14 conjunctions in an element. And it's actually much closer to 800 years before the cycle returns. And the other thing that I noticed is that Abu Masar said the number one chart for any given moment is the previous Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Aries. That is the absolute most important chart. And this is really important because, as if you look up any, good books on electional astrology, like I've got Robeson's book right here on the side of my desk all the time. They'll tell you that any electional chart that you make, it has to consider A, the natal chart, and B, you have to consider the mundane chart. So you see, that's where Abu Masar was coming from. Like, hey, this is sort of the ground upon which, the foundation upon which, whatever tower you build for the next 800 years is going to have this as a foundation. Now, that's quite a statement. So, and I believe that there's something to it. But if we're going to make a statement like that, we ought to be darn sure that we've got the right one, right? So I started looking at it and I thought, judging from the historical record, it seems to me that the most important developments were when the great conjunctions entered the fire trigon. The first conjunction in the fire trigon saw much more important developments. Now, the conjunction in Aries saw very important developments, still important to look at that. But it seems to me the one in the fiery trigon is really important. So I went back and I looked at that, and what I found was astounding. Um, Going back to like 5000 BC, every single time that the for 800-year cycles, so that's 6400 years, the entirety of civilization as we know it, more or less. Every single time that Jupiter and Saturn enter Leo, enter the fiery trigon, it happens in the sign of Leo. No other sign. Often Aries is not even the third. It goes Leo, Sagittarius, back to Leo, and then maybe it goes into Pisces, back into water before it gets to Aries. So this is very interesting. And then all of a sudden, that changes. In 1603, there's a conjunction. The first one in the fire trigon is in Sagittarius. Well, this is interesting. So is that an aberration? Does it just go Leo, 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 then Sagittarius, and then back to Leo? No. It goes Leo, 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 Leo 8 times, and then Sagittarius, 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 Sagittarius. So there's a fundamental shift in the nature of this cycle that happens at this time. You start looking, zooming in closer, and you get some freaky stuff going on. 20 years before the 1603 conjunction, which would be the last conjunction of the 800-year cycle, but really the last conjunction of the last cycle that began in Leo, essentially, right? John Dee and Edward Kelly are contacted by angels saying, hey, there's about to be a new ion coming around, and there's this whole new system of magic that we want you to know about. Wow. I mean, that's quite a synchronicity. And then of course, we don't, this is just talking about within the transmissions of esoterica. After this great conjunction, you have the Rosicrucian manifestos arrive on the scene, which was a huge game changer. And then if we look outside the esoteric currents, of course, we have Galileo and Kepler and comets and supernovas, and all this stuff is happening. And of course, socio-political changes are happening. So I look at this and I think, man, this chart might be the one that we want to think of as the foundation when we're doing all our electional work and all this other stuff, because it seems to me that the evidence for a fundamental shift in the world and in the consciousness of humanity is abundantly there. And so, that's basically where I'm at right now. And I actually enrolled in a course with in an academic course. It's been a while since I've done anything academic, but I was like, I've got to have a container within which to frame this, because there's so much. I mean, I've got a whole notebook full of all this stuff, watching how these conjunctions, when they happen, the cities where the conjunction is rising, they end up becoming very important centers of culture and learning, and which is interesting, because one of the things that I noticed with this past great conjunction, culminating over Puerto Rico. So it'll be interesting to see if Puerto Rican statehood comes up as an issue in the next 20 years. It would be an interesting, I won't want to say the solution, because who knows, but it would be an interesting adjustment to the current polarized dilemma in terms of politics, because if you introduce Puerto Rico as a state, you got to introduce Washington, D.C. And that could really change the balance of the politics, which is currently like locked in this very dysfunctional situation. And that's all I'm going to say about that. But yeah, so that's, to me, that's what it means to break open the head of Zeus. It's like, hey, there's a lot of wonderful knowledge. And I mean, think about this in the myth for a second. You know, what happened was Zeus, I think this is before Hera by some accounts, but Zeus married Metis, the god of wisdom. And she told him, yeah, you know, I'm going to bear you some children, and one of them's going to do what you did to your daddy and what he did to his daddy before him, which is, you know, overthrow you. Zeus said, I can't be having that. I think I'm just going to swallow you. So, like his daddy before him, swallowing is somehow a solution to the situation. It's some weird stuff, man. But if you think about the swallowing in a less literal sense, being swallowed or swallowing suggests taking, you know, people say, so and so is trying to shove their point of view down my throat, right? You hear that. Or so and so, boy, they swallowed that hook, line, and sinker. See what I'm saying? Swallowing refers to taking in something without chewing it, and chewing leads to digestion without masticating it. They just, oh, you know, and then what happens is, you know, you just swallowed the goddess of wisdom, yo. Like that stuff's gonna do something inside you. And what it did is it grew inside his head into Athena. And this was very painful. Think about it. You know, think about that for a second. Wisdom, before it becomes fully grown, is growth pains. Becoming wise is difficult work, even for Zeus. And it's painful. And so he needs to, and eventually he says, man, this headache is killing me. And Hephaestus comes along and lops his head with the axe, and boom, out pops Athena, right? So this, I think that this speaks to the idea of like, when you culturally, we swallow, we have no choice really, because they really are rammed down our throats. As children, we have, you know, we swallow the wisdom and non-wisdom of our culture, right? And that comes to, and the thing is, eventually we have to do two things. We have to get rid of the non-wisdom, hope, you know, and we have to bring to maturity the wisdom that we took in, that we weren't really able to integrate completely yet, you see? And part of that process is to break it down, to break it open, right? The formula for alchemy is break apart and then put back together. So this breaking open of the head of Zeus signifies this process of saying, okay, like here's this wisdom that's been passed down to us. Let's break it open, pull it apart, and say, okay, so here's all the stuff. You know, well, 960 years. No, that's not true. 12 conjunctions. No, well, and Bonatti says 12 or 13. Well, it can be 12 or 13, but it can also be 11 or 14. So 12 or 13 is not true. What we have left is what is more true, not the truth, because we never get there. But now we have a little bit more clarity on it. And from there, okay, now that we have a little more clarity on what it actually is, let's put it back together and see, whoa, what does that create? You see? So that's what I think the presence of Athena in this great conjunction signifies, you see, because if you look back at the previous times when Jupiter and Saturn were in the air element, you see these wonderful, you know, this is when the Pika tricks, the great book of the wise, the aim of the wise, the aim of the sage, the goal of the sage. Think about this, swallowing that wisdom. What's that going to do to you? All right. So It was translated into from I think it was translated into Spanish first, and then into Latin from Arabic. And but that's one thing, right? But even the Pika tricks. I mean, it's really interesting. I don't know what you call them, but some people call them guides. I call them daimons. But sometimes you get these messages, right, from some higher plane. Maybe it's just your higher self, which is another way of talking about the daimon. But I was asking a question and saying, how can this thing, there was a contradiction in what I was being, in what I was thinking about. I was like, how can this be true and that be true at the same time? And the answer was, please understand that most things are half wise and half full of I had the greatest laugh over that because there you go. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter how much we venerate the source. That's just the nature of things. You can't have, nothing's perfect, right? So you have to break it apart, try to get rid of as much of the junk as you can and put it back together into something more whole and integrated. That's the job of, that would be sort of like the apprentice piece would be translating the things, which we've done a great job since the Jupiter Saturn conjunction in the 80s in air. All kinds of new stuff. The Pikatrix has been translated to English, for instance. Fantastic. But there's a lot of stuff in there. Like, has anybody really broken down? Like, I was fascinated to find that these Guzahar, situations, they were checking out the planetary nodes, man. And so there's a lot of stuff in there that that may be questionable to some people. There's a lot of stuff that is really cool that maybe got looked over because either didn't know what they were looking at or just was looking for something else. That's what happened to me. I had that book for a year or more before I realized, holy crap, look at this. They're talking about planetary nodes. So the translating is great. Receiving knowledge from beyond the limits of our current structures. That's what Aquarius is about. Yeah. All right. But what you do with it afterwards, do you just swallow it like Zeus? Well, if you do, you're going to get a headache, and eventually you're going to have to deal with that. So why not go ahead and plan on taking care of that situation? Sort of, that's what Saturn's about. Long-term planning and structure and discipline, right? So why not build that in from the beginning, right? Okay, so now what would that look like? Well, let's go back to this time period that I talked about around 1603, right before you have the Enochian transmissions with John Dee and Edward Kelly, and right after you have the Rosicrucian manifestos. And about this time, there was another cat by the name of Michael Meyer, not Michael Myers of the movie Halloween, Mayer, Michael Meyer, an alchemist, who did this incredible treatise, which was, it had images, music, and text. So it's alchemical in the sense that it's multi media. It's really an incredible text, and to this day it remains a mystery what the heck this guy was actually saying. And yet it's clear that it's very profound. And so it's interesting that this work happened about this time of this conjunction that I'm saying probably is the main one we should look at. As far as I can tell, this is the one I'm focusing on. And so in this, there's this Meyer takes this this passage from, I think it's Pindar. It was a 5th century BC Greek poet or scholar or somebody, where he takes this account of how Pallas Athena was born, and he puts it into an emblem. He makes an emblem, a piece of art out of it, and what it says above the emblem is essentially, rough translation: when Pallas was born, Sol was in conjunction with Venus, and it rained gold at Rhodes. So that's an interesting story right there, right? And then he kind of goes on to say, here's the half full of part of it. Well, this is where the half full of blank comes in. He goes on to say, about how the philosopher's stone, when it, there's this saying in the Emerald Tablet where it says that it penetrates every solid thing and overcomes every subtle thing. So the fixed and the volatile, it'll make the volatile, which is hard to grasp, it'll make it more fixed where you can get a hold of it. And it'll make the fixed, which you can't move or get out of, it'll make it more malleable. Yeah. So Meyer says something to the effect of that the philosopher's stone renders crude and barbarous people even more dense, while gifting the wise with health and wisdom. Now, this is interesting because there's this sort of intellectual snobbery that's it's quite obvious here, and it just, I can't. Fortunately for me, I never swallowed that whole bunch of stuff. I come from working class people, and I when I was out traveling around, regular everyday people helped me, and they were good people. Just the other day, I was walking up the road. It was a wonderful early spring morning. Sun. There was all this mist. This is a really interesting allegory too. There was all this mist of fog, but I knew the sun was going to be coming out. And I was like, I'm going to take a walk and enjoy the sensation of the fog clearing and the sun coming out, because that's an incredible thing to witness, spectacle of nature. So I'm walking up the mountain, and I'm going up this, and this car comes along, passes me, and stops, and starts to reverse. And I'm like, whoa! I'm like, get out of this cat's way. And then he stops and he turns and he goes up this little driveway and he stops there. And I'm like walking along. I'm kind of looking at him like, "Are you done, dude? What's going on?" And he says, "Hey, fella, this is nice as can be." And you could hear in his voice, he doesn't regard me as a stranger to be like, "Hey, you can't sleep here." Like, there's not that. That's not going on. He's like, "Fellow traveler, hey, fellow." And I said, and I just motioned to him, like, yeah, hey, hey, yeah, if you need to go, go ahead. Like, I'm not messing around. I'm not fighting a car today. I'm not jousting. I'm just walking. And he says, no, I'm going this way. And it was right after I was reading this passage by Meyer, and I was thinking to myself, that whole thing where this sort of classism comes in, where the intellectual snobbery of thinking that people who are less educated than you are bad people, or dense or stupid. That's just, we don't need to go there. At the same time, I do think that there's something interesting going on here, and that is that when we step back for a minute and we look at this process that I was talking about, of the foggy air becoming more clear, This goes back to something from Anaximenes that I pointed out in my blog for the Mountain Astrologer when I was talking about what does the Mercury elemental year of air look like? Well, how can we work with this? And Anaximenes said that the fundamental element of the universe is air, and that everything comes from air. It either through process of rarefaction, that is becoming less dense, and so becoming more clear, becoming more like fire, or of condensation, becoming more dense and becoming like water or stone. You see? So on the one hand, Meyer's onto something there that yes, you can go either way. You can become more dense, more solid, more embodied, which may or may not be a bad thing. Being more embodied sometimes is exactly the medicine necessary for certain things. Yeah. If you're living in your head all the time, I mean, I definitely fight with that. You know, in Jungian terms, I'm an intuitive. So my inferior function, my shadow, if you will, is sensation. So doing yoga, taking walks, all this stuff, it's really important for me to stay grounded. And fortunately, I have a Virgo moon to help with that, but that's kind of mental too. But anyways, you know, Meyer's onto something here in a way, but he kind of goes a little bit snobby with it, which I'm not sorry, Michael. I'm not swallowing that crap. But anyways, what's interesting is that if we look at this idea of the elements in terms of density, right? Fire is the most dense, air, and then water, and then earth. And so what he's talking about is from Anaximenes, which is this idea of the density of the elements, right? Now, let's look at what Meyer said, which was maybe the not half full of bunk stuff. He said that that Pallas was born when Sol was in conjunction with Venus. The Sun and Venus are in conjunction. Now, conjunction in alchemical terms means sacred marriage, and it's literally pictured. But you know, here's Apollo and Venus making love in a tent back behind the scene. Yeah. So now what does that look like in alchemical terms? Well, in alchemical terms, you know, Venus is moist. Venus brings things together. The sun is dry. The sun dries things out. Venus is cool. She soothes. She, you know, one of the things that Venus talismans will do is if there's any negativity in your life, you know, if you're having trouble with, you know, somebody's giving you a bunch of grief about something, you know, calling on Venus will soothe that situation and will dispel negativity. Yeah. So she's cool and moist. The sun is hot and dry. What happens when we mix those two qualities? Well, we've got moist and we've got hot. Hot and moist together is like air. It's like Jupiter. You see? So what he's saying, in the way I read it, is that Pallas Athena is like Jupiter. That is airy. So you see, it goes back to what I was saying about this archetypal complex. Mercury has triplicity, dignity, in the air signs for a reason. Mercury is airy, right? Jupiter is airy. Pallas Athena, it combines Sun and Venus, which is to say, she's hot and moist. She's airy. You see, so so this is very interesting in and of itself. So now, what can we do with that information? What does that mean? So if you think about it, for instance, Pallas Athena was the goddess of strategic warfare, right? So she, for instance, famously held Achilles back from attacking Agamemnon, the emperor. Agamemnon was a bully. he could afford to be. He had the most powerful army on earth. He walked in and took what he wanted. That's kind of what emperors do, or the bad ones anyways. And Achilles is just a warrior. He, you know, he didn't have an army. He had a small one, but he didn't have an army to take on Agamemnon. It would have been extremely foolish to just all out. Now he was insolent towards Agamemnon and openly despised him. He could, because he was Achilles, right? But he couldn't go and do, and just like, all out say, F you and let's roll, right? Because that's not going to end well. So there's this restraint. There's this, hey, it's not time. That's not the right thing to do. Like, pull back, to chill for a minute, right? So there's this moist, cool, moist, like Venus-like quality. Pull back, let things become clear, let the picture clear up, and then it'll be time to act. So there's this mixture of the active yang and the passive yin, knowing which one is the appropriate one at which time. That is what makes for a good strategist, you see? And that's why, that she was also the goddess, the patroness of arts and crafts. And that's mastery of, like, weaving, for instance. You have to know when to do each of the actions. You have to have a rhythm. So art requires mastery of force, active, and field, passive, of knowing when not to interfere with the process and knowing when to impose your will in the process. You see? And that's what Pallas Athena is about. Another way of saying the same thing is that air is an intermediary between water, cool and moist, and fire, hot and dry. Water, cool and moist, fire, hot and dry, they don't share a quality. But air, being hot and moist, shares a quality with each one. And so it's literally like we were saying, you have this wet situation where it's just rained or snowed or whatever, and then the sun comes out and begins to heat things up. Air, literally, the air, like the steam, the vapor comes up, makes it foggy, cloudy, or whatever, and then as that clears, the sun gets hotter and hotter. So there's this rarefaction that happens, right? The same thing can happen if you're in a fiery state. You can begin to cool off and there's this condensation that happens and become more and more dense and more embodied, right? And it's knowing which way the process is going and or which way it needs to go that makes wisdom. You see? All right, so that's the lesson of Pallas Athena. Okay, so one more thing I want to show you before we finish up here. Let's get back to the present moment. Right now, so we have Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn making an appearance in the morning sky, right? And then eventually, these are tables from my book, Mercury Elemental Year. If we track, eventually Mercury is going to get farther and farther and farther from the sun before it turns and starts going back into the beams of the sun. That point we call maximum elongation happens on March 6th at around 20 degrees of Aquarius. The last time this happened in the evening sky, that's when Mercury was at this Guzahar, and it was in the degrees of Deneb-al-Gedi and Sad-al-Sud. This time Mercury is going to reach maximum elongation a few degrees before Deneb-al-Gedi and Sad-al-Sud. So, it's not quite as close on the backside, but I think it's still worth looking at, in particular because the moon is going to join these and make a four character sky drama on the 10th. So the morning sky on the 10th will have Mercury with Sad-al-Sud and Deneb-al-Gedi. Jupiter will be there. Saturn, the domicile ruler of Aquarius, will be there. So the moon will be translating the light from Saturn to Jupiter to Mercury to Deneb Algeti, essentially. That's some pretty, that's some pretty heavy stuff. And Deneb Algeti is a star of wisdom. And you know, Agrippa says it's of the nature of Mercury and Saturn. So it makes sense that it would be a star of writers and occultists, right? Because Mercury and Saturn are the planets of occultists because Mercury is about transmission of knowledge, transmission of communication, right? You have to be able to communicate to send and receive knowledge. And Saturn is the planet of esoteric knowledge because it takes time, it takes patience, it takes discipline, it takes the ability to go deep and to go below the surface. That's where the gold is at. Yeah. You know, so this is a profound alignment on March 10th that I think is well worth paying attention to. This is one of the several electional opportunities that I outline in my monthly report for my members. I think it's a 24-page report this month. Last month it was like 28. But that is available for $15 now. And then if you want to sign up for the next level, you get access to all the reports and lectures and everything I've done for the past 10 years. You get access to my archives. And then the next level above that, you get access to me, unlimited access at only $1.50 a minute, which is still a pretty good deal. So there's 3 levels to join up there, and you'll get, you know, like this election with Mercury, Deneb Algeti. You'll get I always have a planetary election, decan election, fixed star election, and constellational election. So there's 4 kinds. You know, there could be anywhere from like 5, 6 to 8 or 9 different opportunities there. And so you can pick and choose from, I think I'll work with, and not all of them are the same. You know, I do have an election in there for Venus and Pisces, but unfortunately, this year, Venus's transit through Pisces, she's under the beams of the sun the whole way. Now, she's protected from that situation by being in her dignity. Actually, 3 dignities there. She's got exaltation, triplicity, and bounds dignity in that first part of Pisces. So she's well protected. That's not a problem. But nonetheless, she's invisible. So to me, invisible planets have agency in the invisible realm. So this is about spiritual work. So we're not necessarily going to make material works like talismans, but that doesn't mean that we can't call on Venus for spiritual help. For instance, with, you know, if we have a problem where we want to get some peace or concord or, you know, freedom from strife in our life. It's a pretty good time. I mean, all 5 visible planets are in their dignities at one point this month. So that's always nice. Planets in their dignities suggest, you know, helpful energies that are willing and able to help. So anyways, you can check that out. I think $15 a month is a pretty good deal for that. And yeah, stay in touch. Otherwise, I'm going to be sending out some newsletters here at some point. I'm going to be speaking for the ASC conference over there in Great Britain, UK. Let's see, that's coming up in April. I'm going to be speaking for the San Diego astrology group in April as well. So make sure you're signed up for my newsletter, because nowadays, you know, it used to be if I go give a talk for the San Diego group, you got to wait around to get the recording for that. But you can actually join the San Diego group, and so on and so forth, and you can sign up. There's a discount code that comes along with if you sign up for the astrology student conference. And so I'm going to be sending out, so at the very least, you want to make sure you're signed up for my email list, my newsletter list. I'm going to be sending that out pretty soon. And Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think March is going to be, I think March is definitely going to be, it feels lighter to me. That feels like there's some pretty nice magical opportunities. And hopefully we can begin to get out from under this black cloud that we've been sort of um, dealing with for a while now. It feels like it's time to begin to have that situation where, like, you know, the mist starts to clear a little bit and things get a little bit lighter. So I hope you're experiencing some of that. It's a beautiful day here in Western North Carolina. It's supposed to be like 60 degrees. I'm going out and hitting the trails. So I'll see y'all next time. Until then, bright blessings of Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn as morning stars, dorifores of the sun.